We've talked about cooperation, and the next part is a follow-on to that, because what we're going to address here is going to work so much better if cooperation is already much improved. Now, occasionally I have kids who come in who are totally cooperative. That's never been an issue, so then we're going to move into this next issue. And this is a surprising issue when we talk about ADD, because it isn't about ADD. It's the issue of avoidance. So what is avoidance? Avoidance is the tendency to put off, postpone, or not do something that we find unpleasant, distasteful, not fun, unrewarding, or whatever. And that's human nature. But avoidance, when it becomes a pattern or a habit or a style, creates a lot of problems in itself. One problem is it actually contributes or creates anxiety. The avoidance of unpleasant things actually makes them more unpleasant. And overcoming any sort of anxiety, often, bottom line, comes down to, at some point, be willing to confront the thing you dislike. How does this fit in with ADD? Well, if your brain does not like boring things, then pretty quickly, lots of things that seem boring or difficult or you don't sense the immediate reward in become things to avoid. And then you get into this pattern of avoidance of anything that isn't fun. So this is what we need to address in this second part of the ADD successful. We need kids to start to recognize, to be better at confronting the things that are challenging. So how do we do this? The first thing is, and I'm going to call this the low-hanging fruit of being a parent, is don't enable simple avoidance. Just because a child says something is no fun, or they don't like it, or it's scary, or whatever, you probably do a lot of times do better. Come on, just go do it anyhow. Don't make a big deal. Have them do it. Now I'm talking about small stuff, and you have to judge, because it's not psychologically good for a child to push them over into what they feel truly overwhelmed about. You can think about, for some kids, going to school on the first day of school is hard, and it's better if the parent walks them to school, sits there for a little bit, and over a couple of days helps the child address their fears. And, by a month or two, they don't even want you there. They're ready to go to school all by themselves. We've all experienced this. But what if the thing that you're asking your child to do, that they're avoiding, is really, in their eyes, way too difficult or impossible? Because you just can't force children into doing these things. And here, one analogy is you can think like a video game designer. What they do is they make it one small step at a time. They break down the great quest, the great hunt, or whatever, into small steps that you master as you go. And when things are set up like that, it's amazing how persistent children will be, because each piece is doable. And this then requires you to think about, how can I break this difficult thing up and say, let's just get this part done. That's great. Stop. Okay, let's get this part done. So think like a video game designer. The next suggestion for helping children overcome avoidance is actually counterintuitive. Parents are often likely to say to their child, this is easy. But actually, we know that people are more motivated by things that they perceive as hard. And also, if you feel you're not good at something, or you see something as hard and somebody tells you it's easy, it makes you feel kind of like, what's wrong with me? So pointing out or saying, this next thing is tough, or this isn't easy, or you have to work at this, because everybody has to work at this at first to get it, is much more likely to encourage the child to try it. And one of the key things in motivation is the sense of mastery, that we do things to get better at them. So being honest and saying, this is hard, is a good step. Surprising, often kids will come home from school with their new teacher and like a teacher who they perceive as more demanding, as long as the demandingness, you can do this, also conveys that sense of, you can do this. It's hard, but I have faith. I know you can do it. And again, if you have to simplify it and break it down, do so. But those two are what get kids working on this. more in the psychology of the willingness to try things comes out to what we attribute our success. I'll tell you about a famous experiment. A group of kids, I think they were third graders, but something like that, were given puzzles to work on. And they were all puzzles that third graders could do. And at the end, when all the kids had finished the puzzles, half of the kids were told that they had done great. They were really smart. And the other half of the kids were told they had done great. They had really worked hard. Now, what they were told had a huge impact on whether they were willing to try an even harder set of puzzles. Can you guess which one? You may have already heard this story, but the answer is the kids who were told that they had worked hard, they were really hard workers, did much better. The kids who were told they were smart were kind of reluctant to take on more hard, more difficult puzzles. And I think in part because they felt that if they didn't do well, then they weren't maybe so smart after all. Or that they would come back and they would say, well, these were stupid puzzles. And it's often you'll find kids who avoid things describe a lot of stuff that they don't feel they can do well as stupid. When really what they're saying is, I don't want to be exposed as stupid. But if you present it as, you're a hard worker, you're really tough, you can be tough. Doesn't matter what it is. Tough is tough and tough is persistent. So you want to work on that notion of never giving credit to, oh, you're smart or you're naturally good at that. But you're a hard worker, or boy, you've come up with some creative ways to do that. Because this builds the kind of character set that carries the child well past when they leave your home, or at least when they're out of your sight. So it's better to compliment or praise your kids for working hard, for being persistent. And yet it's also interesting is that one of the hardest things for parents to not do is to keep praising their kids for being smart. So you're probably going to have to work at this for a while. And yes, you'll tell your child, boy, you're smart. But remember, you do better to say you're a hard worker than you're smart. This next suggestion is kind of aligned with what we just talked about, which is the concept of a growth mindset. And when they've done studies of people who succeed at something versus those who don't, one of the characteristics of people who are successful, and not just ADD, but certainly people with ADD too, is they have what's called a growth mindset versus what's called a fixed mindset. So a growth mindset says, we get good at things by persistent effort at them. We set a goal and we strive for it. We work, we work, we work. And a fixed mindset says people who are good at things because they were born that way. And so how do you convey this to your child? One way is the type of stories that you talk about yourself, how you got good at things, how you overcame obstacles. That obstacles are things that we overcome through persistent effort. Similarly, you can tell stories about your child when they were younger and the obstacles that they overcame. You could, I guess, go back to learning to walk, but there are lots of things that kids at first weren't good at and got good at. And being reminded of that helps engender this growth mindset in your child. Many children with attention problems have low self-esteem. And so how do you address that? Because to some degree, just simply saying, well, you're really good at that doesn't work, doesn't match up to their perception. So here what you want to be doing is you want to be attentive to when your child does something that more likely they would have avoided. And at that point, after they've done it, that's what you want to ask about. How were you able to do that? How did you able to persist with that? How did you figure that out? That was tough, and you did it. Tell me about that. Getting them to talk about their own efforts counters their own sense that they're not good at things. And that's the point here. So a closing thought on this is that if you try to do this work on avoidance and self-esteem and growth mindset, and you feel you're running into, just a wall of hostility, look back on the cooperation piece and see if you have good cooperation. One of the things that we found when we did the cooperation studies is that when kids weren't very cooperative, they also weren't as responsive to parental suggestion and direction. But as they became more cooperative at home, that defensiveness fell away, and then your efforts on overcoming avoidance, building growth mindset, self-esteem, persistence, grit, and all that was much more impactful. So let me recap what we just covered. First, don't enable avoidance. If it's simple, have them do it. Second, think like a video designer. Take big problems and break them into small, doable steps where they have success all along the way. 3, talking about being something as being hard can actually be better than talking about something being easy. The challenge is a motivator. 4, focus on their effort and persistence, not their being smart or their being naturally good at something. Develop a growth mindset, which is themes around the idea that we get good at things by working at them. Challenge low self-esteem by being attentive to and talking about instances when your youngster just did something that they normally would have avoided. And lastly, if you're having problems with this whole discussion and this approach to your youngster, take a look to see whether you've gotten the cooperation up into the higher levels so that they'll be more receptive to you. Building your child, self-esteem, their character, their ability to overcome avoidance is not a one-day or a one-week thing. It's a process that you'll take through your entire child's life, but it's a gift that we know they carry forward throughout their life and become, quote, ADD successful.